You all need to hear this immediately because 6 Block was waiting for Isaiah Chance as soon as he entered the prison. Let me reiterate that so it lands correctly, family. Julio Foolio, the man who assisted in the planning of Charles Jones' murder, the man who was tracked by an ankle monitor for months, the man who his mother called quiet, reserved, and helpful around the house, entered the prison block and had his welcome mat torn from under him right away. First hours of the first day. Before he even knew which block he was assigned to, hands were on him. This is the portion that everyone will have to sit through. This guy wasn't prepared for what was to come. He was never. In front of the jury, his own defense lawyer informed them that Isaiah Chance was an aspiring rapper who had no firearms linked to him, no gang membership records, and no gang tattoos. In essence, he begged 12 strangers that his client was simply an ordinary young man who got caught up with the wrong people. The defense was that the folks who were paid to portray him as a mobster were unable to even sell that story. They decided that he was simply a lost child and completely abandoned the street angle. In any case, the jury rejected it since he is still convicted of first-degree murder, faces the death penalty, and had his entire existence turned upside down on the first day. However, since this narrative isn't just about one man getting jumped, we have to go back in time to truly appreciate how crazy this whole situation is. This is about a whole fake identity being gradually taken away until all that remained was a terrified man sobbing in court and pleading to live. And today, we're dissecting everything. No mercy, no filter. Come on. We had to return to Jacksonville, Florida, one of the most underappreciated combat zones in the entire South, in order for you to comprehend how we got here. Before Foolio's name began to ring out across the nation, the rest of the country seldom knew about the gang war that had been raging on Jacksonville streets for more than 10 years. 6 Block, sometimes referred to as KTA, or Kill Them All, was on one side. Every diss tune, every funeral post, Julio's entire persona, his rap collection, and his social media presence were all 6 Block. Not only was Charles Jones connected to the movement, but he was also one of its leading figures. According to detectives' testimony, he was one of 6 Block's top executives, functioning at a level comparable to Young Gene Ace's position atop ATK. ATK, Ace's top killers, and their allies, a gang known as 1200, are on the other side. This wasn't a brand new feud that arose over a rap line. Investigators cited murders dating back to 2018. Bodies on both sides, numerous killings, numerous gunfire. Before Julio ever had 1 million listeners on Spotify, the conflict was genuine, vicious, and had been going on for years. This is when Isaiah Chance comes into play. Gang member Isaiah Chance, who was 23 at the time of the trial, was publicly identified as an ATK member. In order to demonstrate the clear documented friction between the two men before to the murder, prosecutors even presented his connections, phone records, social media accounts, and a Twitter space beef between him and Julio himself that cops kept as evidence. Isaiah Chance and Charles Jones engaged in a live recorded dispute that was available for viewing on the internet. This was already being observed by the JSO gang unit. They were already aware that these two smoked. Here's what, however, contradicts the story the streets were telling about this individual. Isaiah Chance is not connected to any gangs. None of the weapons recovered came back to him. None of the clothing came back to him. He doesn't legally qualify as a documented gang member because he doesn't even have the tattoos to signify it. The arresting JSO officer didn't formally document him as a gang member, declared his defense lawyer, who was literally hired to save his life, in front of the jury. Chance's mother, who testified during the penalty phase when her son's life was literally in jeopardy, described him as reserved and caring, said she never witnessed him using weapons or engaging in gang activity, and said she sought help for his speech problems because he didn't even speak until he was 4 or 5 years old. Later, one of his father figures testified that Chance had expressed a desire to travel and become a merchant marine. "I wanted to do something with a purpose." Now look, I'm not here to defend a convicted first-degree murderer. The jury heard all of this and still found him guilty. He is guilty. What I'm trying to say is that this man lived his entire life in the shadow of a gang war that he was not fundamentally prepared to participate in. He wasn't the shooter. He was the guy in the silver Chevrolet Cruze sneaking through Tampa nightclubs at midnight, getting out of the car at 2 different places, and putting his phone to his face to ping Gathrights' car so they knew where Foolio was, all without pulling a trigger. That tells you everything about Isaiah Chance. He was the lookout, the spotter, and the digital scout for a murder that he helped plan but didn't have the courage to carry out directly. Now let's talk about how June 23, 2024 actually transpired, because every detail of this night matters. Foolio turned 26 on June 21st, 2 days before his death, and posted on X Twitter, the morning before they killed him, saying, "God, thank you for giving me another year." On June 14th, 9 days prior to his birthday celebration in Tampa, he posted flyers on Instagram announcing that he had rented an Airbnb, essentially broadcasting his coordinates to anyone who was paying attention. He was thankful, celebrating, and thought he'd made it to another birthday in a life where that was genuinely never guaranteed. This is where things get crazy. According to the prosecution, the 4 defendants started organizing their coordinated mission to kill Charles Jones specifically because of those Instagram flyers. They saw the post on June 14th, and that's when the plan began to take shape. They weren't rushing at the last minute. Instead, they had 9 days to plan, organize, and figure out how they were going to get there. The day before the murder, they drove down from Jacksonville and arrived in Tampa on June 22nd. These guys checked in, posted up, and waited. On June 23rd, Julio and his group were exploring the city, visiting strip clubs, a gentleman's club called Teasers, and other locations. He was having the time of his life on his birthday weekend. And throughout it all, Isaiah Chance and his girlfriend Alicia Andrews were following the convoy through Tampa in the shadows in a silver Chevrolet Cruze. Surveillance footage actually showed them at 2 different clubs at precisely the same time Julio and his crew were there. The state's attorney claimed it was clean during closing arguments. They never went near the door or the bouncer, and they weren't there to party. The shooters, Sean Gathright, 20, Davian Murphy, 29, and Rashad Murphy, 32, were behind them in the second car, a Chevrolet Impala, carrying 2 AR-style rifles and a Glock handgun with an extended high-capacity magazine. They were there to find and report. The jury had to watch and consider the surveillance footage from a hotel parking lot after Julio was expelled from the Airbnb at some point that evening due to an excessive number of guests. He attempted to reserve a hotel room at the Home 2 Suites near the University of South Florida on McKinley Drive, but that's where it all ended. Chance got out of the car, made a call, and then the Impala rolled up. 31 9mm shell casings were recovered from the scene after the gunman, Gathright, and the Murphy brothers disguised themselves, exited the vehicles, and opened fire. The rifles had brass catchers on them, which were specifically made to collect spent casings so they wouldn't leave forensic evidence behind. These weren't amateurs. This was a planned, premeditated execution. Charles Jones was shot in the heart, lungs, and aorta, and he was declared dead at the scene after the attackers circled Julio's car twice before firing. The car attempted to escape, and one of the defendants unloaded a rifle into it as it raced away. The car was later discovered completely riddled with bullet holes. Following the shooting, the group split up Andrews, and Rashad Murphy took an Uber back to Jacksonville. Gathright drove the Impala out, and license plate readers caught Davion Murphy driving the Chevy Cruze out of Tampa. Within days, the walls began to close in, and Chance was still wearing an ankle monitor from an unrelated offense. He was electronically tethered, and this is where it gets real. When detectives arrived at the Jacksonville home on Captiva Bluff Road in search of him, they had to surround the property, make an announcement, and give instructions for 15 to 20 minutes before Chance and Andrews eventually left. He was holed up and knew what was going to happen. According to court documents, Chance told a JSO detective directly that he would leave the state and never want to be seen again once he got off the monitor. Gang, let me explain. A man who allegedly rolled with ATK, who allegedly helped plan the murder of one of Jacksonville's most infamous rappers, told police that he wanted to vanish. He wasn't talking about holding it down or showing solidarity with his group. Rather, he was talking about running. He had just assisted in the execution of a man on his birthday, and the next plan was to ghost. Real recognize real, and that ain't it. Now, this is where it gets crazy, family, because these defendants' actions throughout the legal process revealed everything about who they really are. Let me start with Sean Gathright, who was 18 years old when he was first arrested for this. The state confirmed that Gathright was one of the shooters that night, and hotel surveillance footage showed him as one of the gunmen opening fire. Gathright was supposed to be the triggerman. His gun and ammunition had forensic connections to the scene and to previous shootings, including an attempt on Foolio's life in October 2023 and an unrelated homicide in 2022. While he was in the interrogation room following his arrest, surveillance footage captured him pacing and then climbing on top of the table in an attempt to escape through the interrogation room ceiling, like a character in a film, which was shown to the jury. The same Sean Gathright who pulled a rifle trigger on a man's birthday was attempting to crawl through ceiling tiles in a police station. That's not a gangster. That's a scared child who didn't think past the night of the shooting. Then, during the trial itself, one of the defendants lost his composure in court. We're talking about outbursts so severe that officers had to handcuff one of them. Someone found it amusing that Gathright was crying in court after the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts on May 8, 2026. A bailiff had to come over and escort him out of the room. The same energy was absent when they were circling Foolio's car twice before lighting it up. Now let's move on to Rashad Murphy, the oldest member of the crew, who felt it was appropriate to post celebratory content on Instagram in the hours following the murder. Not subtle either. One tweet had Bill Belichick and Tom Brady celebrating a Super Bowl win, while another simply, "Hate me kindly." In an interview with detectives after his arrest, Rashad Murphy first denied ever having been in Tampa. Detectives stated that they saw these as celebration posts regarding Foolio's passing. Then, when cell phone records and surveillance footage were placed in front of him, he began to alter his story. He even changed the hand he was writing with during the interview, which detectives noticed because surveillance footage of the actual shooting showed the gunman using his left hand. Davian Murphy, on the other hand, was caught by surveillance cameras acting out the murder on camera in a police station during his own interrogation. Let me be clear, these are not the moves of men who were schooled in street politics. Real people know that you don't post victory laps. You don't act out the murder in a police station. You don't try to crawl through the ceilings of interrogation rooms. And you don't cry at the verdict. These are the actions of young men who watched a lot of media about the streets without ever really being prepared for where those decisions actually lead. No one is a better example of this than Isaiah Chance, the man whose mother had to come out and tell the world that he was quiet, went to church, didn't speak until he was 4 years old, wanted to be a merchant marine, and whose own attorney claimed that the term gangster couldn't even legally be applied to his name because there was no supporting documentation. The internet quickly caught on to all of this. When the trial went live on Court TV and people began to hear the penalty phase testimony, the family members sobbing, the remorse speeches, a sizable portion of the internet pointed out the obvious. These guys are playing a role they borrowed from the environment they grew up in, not from anything they truly were at their core. The culture was talking, and this is where we get to the part you came for. The story doesn't end in the courtroom when a first-degree murder conviction in Florida, especially when a well-known rapper and a well-documented gang war that had been going on for almost 10 years. These men weren't strangers or anonymous when they were processed and transferred into the Florida Department of Correction system. The Foolio case was widely publicized, live-streamed on Court TV, trending on social media for weeks, and the hip-hop community had been following every move. Information spreads more quickly inside those walls than you might imagine. Inmates watch the news, their families provide them with information, and some blocks in the Florida D.C. have strong ties to Jacksonville street politics. 6 Blocks is not a small localized crew. The conflict between 6 Block and ATK/1200 has lasted for years and claimed dozens of lives. When word got out that the men convicted of Julio's murder were being processed into the system, those blocks were already planned and calculated, so the welcome that Julio's killers received on their first day inside was not a coincidence. Julio was one of the most important figures in that conflict when he was alive, both musically and organizationally. His death did not break up that network. On the contrary, it energized the people who survived him. It wasn't random prison violence. Rather, it was planned in the same language that ATK and 1200 used when they drove to Tampa with brass catchers on their rifles. Karma operates in structured ways when the streets are involved. Isaiah Chance, in particular, led the man who assisted in the murder but didn't pull the trigger. He didn't have the gang documentation to even be officially labeled what he was trying to be, and with the Julio connection attached, he entered a building full of people who either knew 6 Block personally, had friends from that side, or just knew the newcomers. Sean Gathright, who was 18 when this began and is now 20, entered a system where the life expectancy of notoriety is brutally short and the consequences of being well known for the wrong thing are immediate. There is a code that operates inside those walls that existed long before any of these men were born, and it does not distinguish between I was the scout and I was the shooter. Conspiracy is conspiracy. Murder is murder. The Murphy brothers, who are both over 30, have gang affiliations that have been documented, and have engaged in post-murder social media behavior that no one has forgotten, entered a system that does not forget either, and they are all doing this while waiting for a death penalty recommendation from the same jury that found all 4 men guilty. The penalty phase began on May 11, 2026, and the same group of 12 jurors is now being asked to recommend that these men be executed. Florida law, as of 2023, requires at least 8 of the 12 jurors must agree for a death recommendation to be made, and prosecutors outlined their aggravating circumstances. They drove across the state to carry out this planned, coordinated, targeted ambush, which involved tracking a man through nightclubs on his birthday using numerous firearms that had been specially altered to reduce forensic evidence. The only thing separating these men from an execution date is those 8 votes. Gathwright's grandmother described him as a wonderful child, his stepfather as intelligent and curious, and his sister sobbed on the stand during the penalty phase testimony. They circled his car twice before firing. Isaiah Chance's father talked about having a good relationship with his son. His mother's husband described a volatile family situation. Davy and Murphy's defense brought up learning disabilities, being kicked out of several homes, and attending 14 different schools. Chance himself had someone testify that he wanted a purpose in life. He talked about a career at sea, traveling the world. And Sean Gathwright himself took the stand during the penalty phase, looked the jury in the eyes, and said, "I'm not here to dispute anything. I'm here to act like a man, accept accountability, and voice my opinions about the entire circumstance. I feel a great deal of regret. This is an awful circumstance. The experience has been traumatic." Charles Jones was 26 years old celebrating his birthday when 31 shot casings rained down on his car, and he was unable to communicate his thoughts, so his regret, whether genuine or fake, came a little late. 2 years late and a murder late, to be exact. He was 18 when he was caught and is now 20. He was shot in the heart, lungs, and aorta and died in a parking lot without being able to accept responsibility or seek atonement. Foolio's mother, Sandrika Mays, was also not silent about the verdict. As soon as the jury returned a guilty verdict, she posted on Instagram with all of her heart, "Justice for Foolio. The right to return." That woman had been struggling and waiting for almost 2 years. Guilty as charged. We are all going to cry together. What do they say? Pop a bottle of Don Julio. Let's drink up. And she got what she came for. Now, let me take a moment to zoom out because this entire case is a masterclass in several things that the culture needs to hear. Firstly, social media will kill you, no cap. On June 14th, Charles Jones posted on Instagram about his birthday trip to Tampa, including where he would be staying and that he had an Airbnb. The killers adjusted when Foolio updated his location, even mentioning that he had been kicked out of the Airbnb and was moving to a new location. The man was live posting his own ambush without realizing it, which is a brutal reality that everyone in this industry and on these streets needs to internalize. Prosecutors confirmed that the defendants started planning the murder specifically because of those posts. The moment that flyer went up, the clock started. Second, and I must say this carefully but clearly, the internet era has produced a generation of people who use gang membership as a social currency without fully considering what that world actually demands of you. Isaiah Chance, an aspiring rapper, was described by his own attorney as being close enough to the fire, deep enough in those circles, Twitter beefing directly with Julio, and connected enough to the ATK network that when the call came, he answered it, costing him his freedom, possibly his life, and getting him jumped on his first day in a Florida prison. That's not a story about gangsters. Charles Jones wanted to celebrate his birthday, so he put up the flyers, reserved the Airbnb, poured up the teasers, tried to find a hotel room when things got complicated, and in that Tampa parking lot on McKinley Drive, 31 bullets, 2 rifles, and a modified Glock made sure he never saw 27. His killers, the scout, the shooters, and the girl with the phone will live out the rest of their days as a result of 90 seconds of gunfire in a hotel parking lot. And on the first day, 6 blocks sent their greeting card. That's how this works, family. Let us know if you think they should be executed or given life in prison. If you haven't subscribed yet, you're sleeping. We don't sugarcoat anything and don't tamper with the facts on our channel. I'll see you in the next one if you enjoy the video and show it to someone who needs to hear this narrative explained correctly.